did his French first.
I was posted in Bosnia for 2 years. So. It's not, because it's part of the yes, of course, it wasn't. It's really close. It's amazing. But it's very difficult as well. No, I'm working. I'm working here. No, but I don't think it was ways. No. I wouldn't really go that far, so they have their own. As I said, the Bosnians have a way. I've spent 3 years there. They don't need out. I mean, they can make life difficult without outside influence. They have a particular capacity for that.
Ha jól tudom, pontosítom, itt a dél-keleti félgén volt, és volt egy nagy hogy a kert végében, tehát a saját kertje végén. De lehet, hogy na mindegy, bombónak jó. Mondom, nem tudom, hogy igaz, de ez a
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Can you? Yes. We have no speaker because this is a university room. Very welcome to the Central European University Democracy Institute. I'm very happy to host this event tonight. My name is Zsuzsa Szelényi. I'm a former Hungarian politician and currently I'm a program director at the CEU Democracy Institute, also a foreign policy specialist, and I'm very, very happy that we can introduce today a very special paper, a very nice political study, a research, which is examining Hungarian foreign policy not from the perspective how Hungary is actually influenced by various other countries or foreign forces, but actually what Hungary is doing in other countries. I'm very happy to host this event to present Balkan Csárdás, Hungarian Foreign Policy Dance, which was produced by our friends from the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. And this research was done this beginning of this year with a huge number of interviews, and most of the people are here were actually somehow contributing to this report. And so before we go to the report presentation itself, let me tell you a couple of words about Hungarian foreign policy and how this was changed, well, in the last 12, 14 years. Maybe many of you, at least Hungarians, do remember Viktor Orbán had a very famous, infamous speech in 2009 when he was preparing for his big victory. And in this speech, he used a term that the Hungarian political landscape has changed from a bipolar structure to a center force field. This center force field is something that he was ready to build his new politics. He meant how the internal Hungarian political landscape has changed, and Fidesz has become a big party, dominant big party in the middle of the Hungarian political arena, smaller parties on the left and on the right. And he was preparing for 20 years of governance back then. Well, he's not there yet. The center force field as an expression is very interesting because it's not relevant only for Hungarian internal politics, but it's also very relevant how Fidesz under Viktor Orbán has changed Hungary's foreign policy. But, after 1990, Hungarian foreign policy had, first of all, it was very consensual. It had a clear transatlantic perspective. And of course, it regarded the regional cooperation and Hungarian minority as an important element of it. But it was basically a transatlanticist foreign policy. If we want to put or name a couple of cities in the world where it was stretched, it would have been probably Brussels, Washington, D.C., and Berlin. So you can see that this was all on the west from Hungary. Compared to this spectrum, Hungary and Central and Eastern Europe was at the periphery. So now the center force field demonstrated something new. It basically declared that Hungary is in the center force field, not on the periphery of something, but actually in the center of something. So in order to be the center, you have to enlarge your scope. And Orbán introduced another couple of cities as focal point of Hungarian foreign policy, namely Berlin, Moscow, and Ankara. So this you can see very different from the spectrum of Washington, Berlin, and Brussels. So the center force field was and is still Hungary's foreign policy's basic perspective. This also correlates very well with the sovereignist foreign policy, as Orbán calls it. Because if you are in the center, you are, according to them, the most sovereign. You have room for balancing, you have more negotiation potential, you can actually build various alliances, you can be the friend of everyone. We don't know whether this means that you are a friend of no one at the end of the day, but actually to create more room for maneuvering was always in the center of Orbán's foreign policy. And the center force field is a kind of key term in this regard. So how was this implemented? Well, many of you are probably aware of the Eastern opening concept, basically outreaching to Turkey, China, Russia, and various other Eastern countries. This is also a kind of focus on Central Europe. If you look back the last 10 years, you could see that Hungary was very operational to revive the Visegrad cooperation. At least until recently, it was pretty successful. Probably in the second part of the 2010s, this was a kind of flourishing relationship. And of course, it also, the center force field created a very ambitious neighborhood politics and a strong intervention from a Hungarian government from practically every neighboring countries. So having a constitutional majority, basically full control over the Hungarian state since 2010, a very good growth rate, 4 to 6% in the 2010s, made a good room for Orban's government to implement this very ambitious foreign policy. Of course, it was not without conflict. It was characterized by high risk-taking. It was really a different kind of foreign policy that was demonstrated by other countries in the region. This was also opening up to less reliable economic partners, inviting Hungary politically charged state investment, rather aggressive use of power, and of course taking conflict with transcendentalists, the Western partners. Somehow this kind of politics could not be successful but to the detriment of the Western allies. This is really what we are seeing today. At the same time, over these 10 years, there was growing big power rivalry in the world. This was also increased competition for crucial resources. And finally, last year, in 2022, a war broke out in Europe. In 2002, we basically arrived to an inflection point. Europe started to significantly change. The war is transforming the European Union, transforming the entire Europe, because Europe's security, after so many years, was under threat. So the European Union also reached a new purpose. It should create a new security architecture, and it should think about itself like a geopolitical unity. This is all very, very new, and there are very, very fast changes happening in Europe. The EU enlargement is on the table again, and enlargement starting and processing, new countries are involved, namely Ukraine and Moldova, and also the EU opened up toward Georgia. So it's actually quite extraordinary, something we did not think even just 3 or 4 years ago. So paradoxically, the war in Ukraine opened up a window also for the Western Balkans. Whether what we get out of this is really a question. So Hungary's relationship to the Balkans, as far as I remember until 1990, was always very important. The Balkan wars in the early 90s were transformative and formative in my personal political career, and there are many other people in the room who had similar experiences. It was in our neighborhood. It was violent, something that we could not imagine before. So Hungary becomes sensitive to this, and I think the support to the Balkan countries was always in the forefront of the Hungarian foreign policy. However, it was not so intensive ever before than in the last 10, 12 years. So how does this look like now, how it developed? This is this spectacular report that we will hear in a few minutes is really try to answer a number of questions and open other questions. So I'm very happy to stop now and invite to the floor Ivana Rankovic, who is a researcher for this great report, and then we will go into discussion with our partners and of course also involve you into the discussion. So Ivana, please come and present us this report.
Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to present this research here in Budapest. In the Belgrade Center for Security Policy, we have part of our research studies have focused on the so-called third actors in the Western Balkans. However, we have somehow overlooked this increased Hungarian presence in the Western Balkans, especially since 2010, when Prime Minister Orban came back to power. And of course, this more active role of Hungary in the Western Balkans has gained a lot of media attention, but our idea was to go beyond that and to see whether there is actually a Hungarian foreign policy strategy towards the Western Balkans. So in that sense, our goal was to cover the main political drivers, also economic considerations, but also soft-powered tools of influence that Hungary has at its disposal towards the region. The primary finding is that there is no single coherent Hungarian foreign policy strategy towards the Western Balkans. However, this region plays a very important role in Hungarian foreign policy agenda. And there are many reasons for this, many interests from both sides that shape the relations between these countries. And I will try to mention a few of them because there are many. So I'll try to give a brief background that we can also discuss later in the discussion. One of the top priorities and one of the main interests of Hungary when it comes to the Western Balkans is definitely Hungary's focus on the stability and security of the Western Balkans region. When we talk about the stability of the region, Zsuzsa just mentioned how these memories of the 1990s and the dissolution of Yugoslavia are very much still alive, and how this persistent fear of the possibility that the Western Balkans could become a security threat to the whole region, and that the instabilities from the Western Balkans could spill over to Hungary. That is one of the main reasons why Hungary is, the current Hungarian regime is trying to prevent that at all costs, and that is also the reason why Hungary is one of the main contributors to the peacekeeping missions both in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. But what we found during our research, what is interesting and to some extent contradictory, is that in addition to the Western Balkans being perceived as a potential security threat, it is also seen as perceived as a security provider for Hungary in terms of migration. We are all aware how the migration issue is one of the key security issues for Hungary, especially after the migration crisis reached its peak during the 2014-2015. And that is also one of the reasons why Hungarian regime is trying to cooperate, especially with Serbia and North Macedonia, because these are the countries that are transition countries through this so-called Balkan route. And in that sense, Hungary is trying to control the migration influx to Hungary by cooperating on the borders, especially Serbian and Hungarian border. Another paradox that I would like to point out here is related to another Hungary's interest, and that is interest for accelerated EU accession of the Western Balkan countries. Hungary is undoubtedly one of the most vocal supporters of a fast-track EU accession of the Western Balkans, and there are also many reasons for that, one being just the mentioned stabilization goal of Hungary and their perception that if the Western Balkans are part of Euro-Atlantic community, it would decrease this potential fear of the Western Balkans being instability factor. But the paradox is that even though Hungary is supporting accelerated EU enlargement, on the other hand, Hungary is the one that does not really comply with the EU values, democratic values and rule of law, which is why somehow Hungary is providing an ideological alternative to this liberal democracy that is at the core of the EU. But of course, and this paradox can also be seen on the example of the current EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Mr. Varhelyi, who is perceived as a true ally to the Western Balkans. However, he is also the one that is also being criticized from Brussels for neglecting rule of law reforms, the necessity of rule of law reforms, sometimes for even polishing official EU documents. So that is again this paradox of Hungary wanting the Western Balkans in the EU as soon as possible, but also being, let's say, a troublemaker within the EU. And of course, another reason why Hungary would like to see the Western Balkans in the EU is also related to the economic cooperation and its desire for the Western Balkans to be part of a single EU market. Economic cooperation has already been improved between the Western Balkans and Hungary. The level of trade has increased. Hungarian investments in the region have also increased. Not only the big Hungarian companies like MOL and OTP Bank, but we also see a lot of Hungarian media investments in the region, especially in North Macedonia and Serbia. But by investing in the media, Hungarian companies are actually supporting the local leaders and their propaganda machine. For example, in Vojvodina, most Hungarian, actually all the Hungarian language media are biased in favor of Fidesz, in favor of Alliance of Vojvodina Hungarians, and therefore in favor of the ruling party in Serbia, Serbian Progressive Party. So that also brings us to another sector of cooperation, and that is the cooperation in energy sector, which has also become very prominent, especially since the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, because, and this is specifically between Serbia and Hungary, these relations have become more prominent because both countries are landlocked countries, meaning that they have restrained energy sources, actually meaning that they are dependent on Russian oil and gas. And this is also an example, I'll speak about the example, how we see that Hungarian strategy is actually, there's no really strategy, but the main decisions are being taken ad hoc, and mostly the decisions are personalized. So this is the example. When the EU introduced sanctions to Russian oil import, okay, I will make this more clear. Serbia used to import oil through the Janov pipeline through Croatia. However, Croatia introduced sanctions to the Russian oil. However, Hungary was exempted from these sanctions because it is a landlocked country and it does not have other energy sources. So President Vučić and Prime Minister Orban announced that there will be a new oil pipeline that will be built and connect Serbia to the Druzhba pipeline, which is the pipeline that Hungary gets oil from and which goes through Ukraine. However, when we were doing our research, we asked ourselves, what is actually the rationale behind this? And is this actually a useful project for Serbia? Because it could happen. First of all, the Druzhba pipeline has already been under some attacks due to war in Ukraine. Also, it could happen that by the time the pipeline that will connect Serbia to the Druzhba pipeline, by the time it is built, Hungary could be also under pressure to introduce sanctions to import of Russian oil. So this is also an example how much of these relations are built on personal relations between the leaders, and that most of the decisions are being taken ad hoc and depending on the domestic situation and how the leaders would like to perceive this. And of course, we cannot overlook the Hungarian minority living in Serbia, but I will try not to go into too many details. But the point is that even though this political proximity between the two regimes in Serbia and Hungary, this political proximity didn't really translate onto the level of society, meaning that the true reconciliation between Hungarian minority and Serbs living in Vojvodina did not really happen. We can maybe go into more details during the discussion in that regard. And finally, I would like to point out these bilateral relations that somehow are at the core of all these interests from both sides. And the bilateral relations, of course, the most prominent one is between Prime Minister Orban and President Vučić, but also between Prime Minister Orban and Dodik, President of Republika Srpska, and also between with VMRO, the PMNE, which is the opposition party in North Macedonia. And the overall political goal of all these relations is to nurture these like-minded regimes. And they are like-minded, they are illiberal regimes, both in the Western Balkans, and this is useful for many reasons for both sides. For example, when we talk about relations between Serbia and Hungary, this partnership has also become now a strategic partnership. We know that in June this year, the Council on Strategic Cooperation has been established, and this is useful for both sides because they could these two leaders support each other on both the domestic and the international level. For example, on domestic level, by legitimizing those illiberal practices that both leaders are using, and on the international level, for example, President Vučić is supporting anti-immigration policy that Hungary is advocating for, while of course Orban is kind of supporting Serbia's access to EU funds. So these are just the examples of how these bilateral relations are somehow at the core, and how these personal relations and personal close ties between the leaders are greatly influencing these relations. And I would like to conclude now with so this foreign policy decision making is very much centralized and personalized. Of course, there are different bilateral priorities, therefore different levels of cooperation have been established between Hungary and other Western Balkan region, other Western Balkan countries, but it is very important to understand the complexity of all these influences and how they are all intertwined, but they are mostly taken into pragmatic interests of both of all the leaders in the Western Balkans and Hungary. And of course we can go into more details about all of this during the discussion, because I believe that I touched upon a lot of topics, but I think that we could go into more details during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. It was really interesting, and of course I would encourage then after the panel, you are welcome also to ask questions to Ivana, so she's part of the party. I would like to invite you, our panelists, introduce our guest. First of all, Csárdás Sivic, who is president of the International Advisory Committee of the Belgrade Center for Security Policy and author of the report together with Ivana Rankovic. Ferenc Németh from the Hungarian Foreign Policy Institute, Western Balkan and Eastern Europe Research Program Head. Peter Kreko, Director of Political Capital and Political Scientist, Psychologist. And I'm very happy to call Márton Dunai, who is journalist and correspondent for the Financial Times for Southeastern Europe. So he himself also very, very knowledgeable in the whole region. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So because I'm supposed to be the moderator of this panel, very rightly so, I actually disagree with Zsuzsanna here. I'm far from being an expert. The only thing I'm an expert is asking questions. So hopefully I'll be asking the right ones, but please don't take my word for as any kind of relationship point. Anyway, so the first question that I wanted to ask you all was what Ivana finished with, which is the Orban-Vučić relationship. Oftentimes, I'm not sure what to make of that. It looks very different when you look at it from Belgrade than when you look at it from Budapest. And so I wanted to ask each of you what you think of the true value of this in terms of political value for each player and in terms of the development of the two countries' relationships.
Should I start?
Please.
I'll try to speak louder because it's not what they usually do, but so please indicate if you cannot hear me. Yeah, it's an interesting relationship, and I mean, they definitely both profit from this relationship, both politically and, you know, if you look into the writings of investigative journalists, both here in Hungary and in Serbia, economically as well. But the question is more, what's the benefit for the countries and for Hungarians and Serbs in all of this? And
Sorry, I'm not gonna let you go
yeah.
as easy as that. What's the benefit for Vučić in being friends with Orban?
Well,
And the other way around.
you mean it's more obvious the other way around? Or?
No. I mean, this is the first I asked. You know, and the other, what's the benefit for Orban for being friends with Vučić politically?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's for Orban. I think even I talked about this. You know, with the war in Ukraine starting, I mean, full-scale invasion, the number of friends in the EU dropped significantly. You know, there was a joke running around that we no longer have V4 but V1. You know, so I think the whole new addendum to the Eastern opening being the Southeastern opening is all about that. Vučić being a similar style politician, I would say, like Orban, maybe a little bit less ideological in some senses. It was a perfect match. For Vučić as well, the support, let's say, given to Serbia from a new member state was very significant for Vučić because it could also break some perceptions that, you know, Serbia doesn't have friends, that on the other side of the spectrum. Although I would say when we talk about the Western Balkans in general, the benefit there is greater for Milorad Dodik, for example, who is much more isolated than Aleksandar Vučić in that sense, right? So,
Don't you think politically it's the equivalent of, you know, grasping for straws?
yeah. Well,
I still have friends. It's not, you know, like
it's an equivalent for definitely. I mean, even I talked about the ad hocish nature of foreign policy. It's all about that. But I think I wouldn't overlook what I wanted to say before you pushed me on this was even I mentioned the reconciliation factor. I mean, we shouldn't undermine that. It is true, as some people in Vojvodina would like to say, from the Hungarian minority that are not with Fidesz, you know, that are politically marginalized right now, that, you know, we have a salon reconciliation, not the reconciliation of peoples. But I think having said that, when you compare today with, say, 2005, is heaven and earth. You know, and I think this, I remember in 2005, I was at the time working for the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe following the European Parliament where Istvan was a member, for example, and there was this famous session of the Foreign Policy Committee that is one of the few that was aired live. It was back in 2005. And I don't know how many here would recollect, but in 2004, there were ethnic incidents or incidents that could be qualified as ethnic in Vojvodina. And by and large, in 2005, the situation was under control. Nothing was happening anymore. But what happens is that AFET committee, Fidesz members of the European Parliament, they proposed this issue to be discussed. And why? Well, because in 2006 there was an electoral campaign here in Hungary, and this is one of the few committee meetings in the European Parliament that was aired live, I would say, in Hungary and maybe in many EU member states, you know. And so from that period, when Fidesz was obviously instrumentalizing ethnic tensions for political gain, we have a completely another situation where we do have this reconciliation, where Hungary pays ads in all major EU member states to promote Serbia as the next EU member state. So this shouldn't be overlooked, but what comes with reconciliation is another two things. One is depopulation, the other one is assimilation. And depopulation is related to the 2010 citizenship law, whereby Hungary gave the opportunity for Hungarians living in the historical Hungarian lands to acquire Hungarian citizenship. So now what we know is, as a direct consequence of this law, there are almost 30% Hungarians less in Vojvodina than in 2011, as the last census says. And assimilation, well, that's another aspect, and that's more related to Hungary, to Fidesz's partner in the country, the Alliance of Vojvodina Hungarians, is the result of the accumulation of all and migration of all Hungarian cultural institutions to the north of Bacska, whereby Hungarians living in the rest of Vojvodina are basically left on their own. And we conducted freedom of information requests for this study, and we found out from the Serbian authorities, we found out that there are 10% less Hungarians attending primary school in Hungarian language, and almost 15% less secondary school. And there is an increase, on the other hand, it's the Janus face of that, of Hungarians attending Serbian school, school in Serbian with Hungarian as a foreign language. I mean, there is nothing wrong with assimilation, but it comes a bit paradoxical, you know, that this is the result of a policy of a politician who is going around with a scarf of Trianon Hungary.
So, first of all, I'm really happy to be able to speak in this panel, and congratulations for the great study. And I mean it. I think it's a really important research, also because I think in most of the discussions that that I hear, the Hungarian perspective of these relationships and the Western European perspectives on these relationships are present, but not that much, I think, the Serbian one. So I think it's you're feeling a niche here with this important report, and also I like the nuanced approach that characterizes the whole research. But coming back to your question as well, because I think it's an important one, and it's not a self-evident one from both directions. On the one hand, of course, or for Viktor Orbán, I think it's good that he plays the role of this illiberal coach in the Western Balkans, where he is really a role model for many, and for a reason, because he's in power for 14 years. And if someone can teach well politicians in the Western Balkans how to dance well the peacock dance, this is exactly him. On the one hand, playing nice at some points, I think it's Orban loses more and more his ability to do that right now, but he did it remarkably well for a long period. Playing nice, but playing tough as well when needed, and playing with the demands, just maximizing the self-interest of himself and his political group. So I think for Hungary, a small country, to be seen as this model to a certain extent in economy, to a certain, definitely in politics in many sense. So I think it's Western Balkans in general, and Serbia in particular, is a very important recipient of Hungarian soft power. Or we could even think about Hungarian sharp power, but let's stay with the concept of soft power. And for I think it has its merits in itself. On the other hand, yes, we can also see that there are economic benefits on the national level and on the private level as well, that are connecting the two players. And of course, there are layers of this relationship that are not visible to, let's say, every journalist like us. The Budapest-Belgrade railway line, for example, many parts of this project have been made confidential, and in this story we also have the Chinese state that plays an important role, and Chinese companies and some other businesses that connect the two countries. Russia plays an important role, so I think it's not always bilateral when we think about the cost benefits, but it's a multilateral game. But there are, I think, foreign policy benefits and economic policy benefits for Orban. As for Vučić, on the one hand, it is a great asset to have someone constantly campaigning for you. Let's make Serbia part of the European Union. The sooner, the better. And of course, it resonates well in Serbia. On the other hand, it is really questionable if in the European Union, Viktor Orbán the perfect messenger for this goal to make Serbia an EU member as soon as possible, because in many sense, especially in Western Europe, Orban increasingly plays the role of this counter litmus. So I mean, what Hungary does, it raises eyebrows, and it can even, I think, make many in the West cautious about accession. And one important argument against the accession itself in Western Europe is that don't let another troublemaker into the European Union. And the proximity, the diplomatic proximity of Vučić and Orban, I think, can cause, from this perspective, at least as much problem than possibly benefit. So I think it's really not black and white, not entirely clear what it brings for the two partners. I think it's more obvious probably why it is seen as a very rosy, how to say, a more advantageous relationship from Serbia than from the side of the Hungary. But as a last thought for the Hungarian part of the equilibrium, in Hungarians who generally feel in the Western Europe that we are regarded to be Eastern, in the Western Balkans, and I think it's true for all the investments project in North Macedonia, in Montenegro, in Serbia and elsewhere, the fact that Hungary is regarded to be a Western country, part of the EU and part of the NATO, I think it's also good to boost self-esteem. So I think psychologically this relationship of Hungary with the Western Balkans, which is, and I think it's rightly mentioned for the study, it's not something new. It's and Zsuzsa also mentioned that it's there since the transition, and it's also something that rather connects countries in the region that divides. V4 generally has a strong interest in the integration of the Western Balkans, but I think it has this identity aspect as well. So the Western Balkans is the region where Hungary and Central Eastern Europe is regarded to be really Western.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I will go back first to your question and then allow me to reflect on my fellow panelists. So I will start off by saying that reconciliation as a process didn't start with the Fidesz government. It started way back in the 1990s by academics from Vojvodina, mainly from universities. But then somehow, obviously because of the disintegration of Yugoslavia, that process itself stopped and then gained new impetus in the early 2000s. I truly believe that before 2010, before Orban came back to power, there were like good grounds to expand for Hungarian, for political aims and for the Hungarian economic community in the Western Balkans. So basically when Orban came back to power, there was this legacy, or there were like, there was a stable soil that he could build his power in the Western Balkans on, so that came somehow naturally. What I think didn't really come naturally is the good relations between Orban and Vučić. And I truly believe that both leaders were pretty much were very much surprised how well they match eventually, because by the time Orban came back to power, we were after the economic crisis. Serbia were impacted hard, so as Hungary, so it became very clear that dependency, both economically and politically, is there between the two states, let alone, not to mention that we are neighbors and we cannot really change that. So somehow, evidently or naturally, there was this process of getting the two leaders together in the framework of reconciliation. That's another problem, that reconciliation, in my view, only happened on a political level, hasn't translated into the societal level yet. But still, I think that was a major step, and after that they could basically start with a clean slate. In the beginning, I do feel that there was a lot of mistrust, because both leaders and both countries basically rely on the past and history and historical experience, and in the last, I would say, 200 years, Serbia and Hungary were always on the opposite sides of history. So I don't think these good relations that we have nowadays between Orban and Vučić came as a result of the reconciliation, or it didn't come as evidently as we might perceive it, but it was met by a lot of mistrust between the partners. But as the years went by and the global changes happened outside and within the EU, both leaders, I presume, realized that there are more common. There are many topics that basically connects them, in addition to the fact that nowadays they see the global issues basically very similarly. By that I mean basically they have a shared vision on how power dynamics are going on a global scale, but also at the EU level as well. So this is something, let's say, their mentality, how they think about the world, how they think about, let's say, the Western dominated world, how they think about multipolarity, that basically connects them and gives them a lot of things to talk about. Another thing is that what comes from this mistrust and this historical experience that they were always on the other side is that they try to seize the day, they try to carpe diem it all, meaning that they try to have as strong political and economic relations as possible now, because they don't know what the future might hold. I don't think both leaders take granted that should any governmental change happen either in Serbia and Hungary, relations would remain same. So they try to basically seize the opportunities now, not in 5 years, but let's say yesterday. And this is how I can basically rationalize the good political and economic relations, as well as the strong economic presence that Hungary has in Serbia, but also in the Western Balkans. When it comes to, let's say, how these good relations translate into internal politics, I don't think the good relations between Serbia and Hungary has anything to do in the context of Hungarian internal politics. I mean, I don't think Fidesz voter would choose Fidesz or Orban's party based on the fact that the good leaders have great connections and great ties, but rather I think it's a better opportunity, let's say a better photo opportunity for Vučić than Orban, which is super interesting if you really think about it. And also I agree with Srdjan, but also Peter, that personal relations in this regard are very much present and matter. I heard so many times that basically Orban has very good chemistry. And this is the word that I heard very often, that Orban has very good chemistry with Vučić and with other leaders from the Western Balkans, including Dodik or the former Prime Minister Gruevski, who is maybe in this audience. So just to summarize what I was trying to say is that the good relations didn't come as easily as we thought. There were the road was very bumpy, and basically I don't think both of the countries or the leaders itself take that for granted.
I wanted to ask all of you again, it's sort of a return question. The report says that these nurturing like-minded regimes is an important aspect of the Orban foreign policy. a strategic one, no less. And Peter also said that Orban is often looked at as a role model of sorts. And my experience does underscore that. Going around the Balkans, I get asked a lot of times, "Oh, you're based in Hungary, so what's the secret of Orban?" That's all they want to know, and they don't mean ideology. They mean the mechanics of power, how he manages to maintain that impeccable system in which basically it's very difficult to challenge, and that's what they're after, and that's what they really look up to him for. But that seems to be a little bit free of ideology for me. And one example is Albania, where the government is obviously a very pro-Western socialist government with very similar holds on power, very similar sort of oversized strength, but a very different ideology, foreign and domestic. So I wanted to ask you, like, to what degree is really the illiberal ideology of Orban a factor of this, or is it somehow free of ideology, this system of relations?
Maybe I will start now. I think it really comes down to the fact that, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but in the former Yugoslavia, and I will include Albania to this as well, you have like this strong leader syndrome still. I mean, we are still trying to find, let's say, this Tito-like or Tito-esque leader, and maybe Orban in that sense might be the best candidate to look at to get some inspiration, or talking from the level of the society, but also politicians might find Orban as, let's say, because of this, as a good role model. And when it comes to, let's say, Orban as being this illiberal coach, I always ask myself, or I need to remind myself that if he is the coach, then he must have a team that was, the team members were willing to, join his team and being coached by him. And for them and for their societies, it don't really seem to be a problem at all to follow, let's say, the path of Orban. But I would like to really hear your opinion about that as well, Rajan.
Yeah, and I was waiting for Peter. Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if only they are learning from Orban and that he's not learning from them as well. Because if you look at the techniques of state capture undertaken in Hungary, some legislative solutions, or in the Western Balkans, sometimes Serbia adopts something before Hungary, and then we see it. Let's say in the media legislation, Serbia was a lot copying here the situation, but then there are some other fields where it's other way around. So I think there is this authoritarian learning in a circular form. But I think we shouldn't overlook as well. I want to introduce a bit of flavor to that. Often Orban is an interesting and useful intermediary for the EU when it comes to, of course, basically being the only sole interlocutor with Milorad Dodik, for example, and Republika Srpska. It's not always that Dodik praises, that Orban praises Dodik when at the beginning of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, for example, Varhelyi came to Bosnia with the announcement of the blockage of 600 million euros of aid to Republika Srpska from the EU because of Dodik's threats to the constitutional order at that time, Bosnia and Herzegovina. When he backed down, then Orban praised him in his campaign in Republika Srpska and everything. But it's not only that what we see on the onset like that. There is often in the migration crisis, for example, where Orban comes handy for others as well. I think that shouldn't be overlooked, because if it were only him, it wouldn't work. I think there is this element to it as well. Yeah.
I don't think illiberalism needs to have some kind of coherent ideological background, talking about the classical ideologies. And if we just think about Orban's allies within the European Union and within the region as well, okay, some of these statements are more past tense now, but Orban was in EPP. Fico is still in SND, but it's the membership is suspended, so probably it's not for a very long time. Ano is in ALDE and Babis's party, which is also a problematic member, and Luan Justice is in ECR. So I think even within the region, we can see that politicians, I mean in Central Eastern Europe, among EU and NATO members, we can see that politicians who are following similar routes of having some kind of grip on power, even if very different patterns, but they are coming from very different ideological backgrounds, and I think it's the same for the Western Balkans. I think here probably we can also say that ideology matters a bit less in this respect. So yes, and talking about strongman syndrome is very important. I think strongman politics cannot be ideologically coherent, if we talk, for example, even about Montenegro, I mean, is Djukanovic a real social democrat, and this is what really defines his politics, or this is something that he achieved in Montenegro, and it's more the power game that you have been just talking about. So I think you mainly responded to your own question that most of the Western Balkans leaders are looking for Orban as an inspiration, not in terms of ideology, but really in terms of power mechanics, economic policy, dealing with in and with Western alliances, dealing with dictators like Putin and even Xi, and media. And it's very important and good that your study has a long chapter on the media influence of Hungary in the Western Balkans, because I mean, one of the most important reasons for the domestic political success of Orban is his media machinery, and it's and interestingly enough, I think in no Western Balkans countries you see such concentrated media models than in Hungary.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, almost there. Certainly, but no, just to add one thing, I think maybe there is authoritarian like-mindedness in terms of techniques employed, but sometimes ideology of Orban's Hungary meets a brick wall in other countries. I don't know if you remember during the migration crisis when Orban offered 42 kilometers of barbed wire to the Montenegrin government as an in-kind contribution that they had to politely refuse, because they would have to place it at the border with Albania that they didn't want to. So there are things when this, let's say, ideological reach from here doesn't meet like-minded reception there.
For sure. This provides a good segue into our next topic, which is economic influence, I think, because one result of the strongman politics is stability in many of these countries, relative stability anyway. I mean, in Hungary, obviously, we're talking over a decade. Vucic doesn't look like he's going anywhere. And Rama and other players that successfully employ this tend to be stable, which is a good context to build economic connections and live long enough to benefit from them. So how do you see this? How do you see the sort of if the political connections are the nerve center, then the blood system of business, how's that building across the Balkans, and to what extent is Hungary really dominating it Is it really the Hungarian octopus growing tentacles, or is it multi-directional as well?
Oh, it depends of the country, obviously. It's not all uniform. The biggest influence is with Serbia, obviously. And I think overall, Hungarian economic footprint grew significantly in the last 10 years. You know, that is due to numerous factors. Also the fact that we had a financial crisis before, you know, but so from almost like 400 million to 1.5 billion or so. So it grew significantly. Hungary is Serbia's, for example, 5th trade partner, you know, with big players. So that shouldn't be overlooked. The extent to which economy follows politics or other way around, it really depends of the sector. You know, you have some players like OTP Bank. That was, you know, I don't want to repeat this for the nickname of this bank, how it's bank with something, you know, but with courage, let's say, but often, you know, it was a pioneer in many of these countries, and it has a significant role, and politics may help, but this came first in some ways. There are then other players that are very strongly linked with the government here, you know, like you have 4IG, you know, buying off telecommunications providers in Montenegro, Albania, and other way, you know, Indotech and other players that are more Fidesz, let's say, or let's say Orban elite related. And then obviously, you know, even I was talking about energy, and she was talking about oil, and I don't know if you want us to talk about this now or maybe later.
Energy is a whole other section of things.
Yes, but you know, there is also state-to-state cooperation here, and you know, MOL being a private company, you know, was present here before Fidesz, but then still it's like kind of helped by this personal relationship between the leaders that we were talking about before. But I can go into it later if you wish.
Well, I agree with Srejan that there are particular sectors, the banking sector with OTP or with the MOL or 4IG in Albania, where Hungary or particular Hungarian companies are leading or, as you said, dominating the market as well. I don't see, however, any, let's say, strategy behind those investments, or I don't see any, let's say, deep thoughts on investing in particular fields in the Western Balkans. On one hand, I really feel that the leading investments came as a, once again, surprise, but once again as a luck, and it has something to do with the economic crisis. During that time, a lot of Western capitals, including Western countries, including France, Greece, but also Slovenia, and to some extent Austria, left the Western Balkans. And there were a lot of, let's say, fields to be, there were a lot of opportunities, economic ones, for Hungary to take, and Hungary basically took the chance and started building on that. On the other hand, as for now, I do believe that Hungary tries to take every economic opportunity in the Western Balkans as it can, so it doesn't really favor any sector or sectors. Obviously, there are some sectors that we have more expertise on, such as water and waste management or mining. But other than that, I think we treat it as the Western Balkans economically as, let's say, this a la carte region where Hungarian, not only big companies, but small and medium-sized companies or enterprises can survive and be competitive. Because if you look around, Hungarian companies, the only region basically where Hungarian companies can be competitive is the Western Balkans, or if we want to be more precise, the Hungarian inhabited regions within Southeast Europe. Obviously, that basically signals this message that Hungary is well aware of its economic opportunities, what Hungarian companies can do abroad, and it is also aware of its disadvantages when it comes to, for example, its size or economic potentials compared to other European countries that are active in the region, such as Germany or Italy.
Can I interject something there? I remember the time when Société Générale left the Western Balkans and OTP basically snapped up a string of banks there, which a lot of people in the investment community thought it was an ingenious move, because all of a sudden you had a sizable banking network across the region. And whereas the Société Générale couldn't really make that work well, obviously that's why they sold, OTP has tremendously profited from this move. So, you know, just following on that, you said that Hungarian companies are only competitive in Hungarian inhabited areas, but that already proved this wrong. And my question is, you know, like, but you're right in the sense, my sense is that similar bigger deals have followed, but it's like sort of the organic development coming from these investments hasn't followed. So, you know, smaller investments, you know, like lots of other Hungarian companies somehow don't seem to find a way as well. Is this correct, first of all? And if it is, then what's keeping more economic flow from happening?
I don't think it's contradictory to what Ferenc has been saying, because OTP is a bit of an exception there. If you look at, you know, other companies, then what he said is sort of true. I mean, other than 4IG, then operating in Montenegro and Albania, where you don't have Hungarians, but then it's a question, you know, how lucrative or successful will it be, or is that really the purpose of these investments finally, or is it gaining political influence in these countries? Because in that sense, the case of Slovenia, for example, I'm sorry, I'm being shown to speak louder. The case of Slovenia is telling, you know, in the way in which Hungarian media, Hungarian financial influence came through the media to help up Janez Janša, and then as soon as he kind of lost power, a lot of these companies pulled out. So I would also look, you know, into these investments over the years. How sustainable will they be? And I think then, you know, you have to separate some of them. OTP, you know, maybe MOL as well.
I was saying that politically motivated investments come and go.
Yeah.
But the ones that are robust enough, like when Janša fell, that was just around the time when OTP spent $1 billion to buy another Slovenian bank and become market leader.
Exactly,
So,
because the nominal owner of some of these investments in Slovenia was a cleaning lady from Bosnia. You know, so, I mean, if you look at, you know, yeah, exactly, yeah.
I also think the political aspect of this, most of the investments with strong involvement of the state, and in that respect I think 4IG and OTP are really different stories. I mean, one is a market player that have proved to be successful even without substantial state help as well, and 4IG is a bit of different animal. But I think from a Hungarian strategic point of view, the mere fact that Hungary is often mentioned in the Western Balkans as one of the very important investors is a source of influence. And I think in some cases, and in that respect, I think it's a bit similar to how Russia builds influence in many countries. It's not always the substantial amount of investment that matters, but you have to pick important sectors, put your hand there, also create an environment where you really seem like an important actor, both economically and both politically, and for that respect, Republika Srpska can be crucially important. If Orban is seen as one who can be the part of the solution, and without him there is no solution in the Western Balkans. Either it is right or wrong, then he already has this leverage. So I think perception plays at least as much important role here than the substantial fundamentals of economic investments. But on the other hand, yes, I think talking a bit more about this perspective of being a Westerner in the Western Balkans. Talking to businessmen who have business in the Western Balkans, I think it is really like experiencing that you can be an important political player, an important economic player, an important investor, and punch above your weight. So it's no question that Germany is, for example, a more important investor in many of these the Western Balkans countries, but Hungary can feel a bit like it's Germany when going to the Western Balkans. And I think it was probably more true in the years after the transition, because yes, I think as the study well explains, the Hungarian investments have rather showed their limits, but it was perceived as this land of opportunities that you can exploit and you can go and make a big profit there. And I think this perception has not totally lost in the business community.
Just one thought. Basically, from what I see, without any major support from the government or governmental institutions, Hungarian companies, small and medium-sized companies, wouldn't be able to, and they wouldn't dare to enter into the markets of the Western Balkans, because in the business community there is still this fear that my investments would be, would be totally lost in the Western Balkans, because they still perceive the region as something unstable.
High political risks.
High political risk, and that for their minds, financial minds, equals the loss of profit.
So, but such a skeletal way of a business or economic presence for Hungary, what is the what's the point, right? I mean, if it's only a few big companies and the meat on the skeleton never comes.
Well, basically the point is to encourage as much as possible the small and medium-sized enterprises to dare to enter. And by seeing that big companies can survive, big companies, for example, UTP, can lend them loans, and for example in Montenegro, there might be better chances for them to be able to enter the markets.
Yeah, but you're saying it's not happening.
So far not. There are programs, but mainly most of the applicants want to do something in Vojvodina, not in other parts of the Western Balkans.
Vojvodina is extremely friendly territory in terms of look at the whole Western Balkans.
Exactly.
It's like it's not exactly foreign, but then so it's not exactly ambitious to be setting up businesses in Vojvodina, right? So real Hungarian influence must be beyond Vojvodina to be called anything.
And this is how what they are trying to work on nowadays, is to get out this Vojvodina focused economic investment of
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think probably one more element that serves as an obstacle is language barriers. So if you want to do business in the Western Balkans, speaking the language, but you guys can tell it much better how important it is. But I think it might be in many cases a big obstacle of stepping to the market. And I think also if we talk about the lack of infrastructure in some sense, I mean, getting to Belgrade via flight, for example, is quite an adventure. And
I drive.
Yes, but so it's not a region that is very well connected, I think. I mean, Hungary to the rest of the region through infrastructure.
And this is why it's so good that we have direct flights, provided by Wizz Air basically to every Western Balkan capitals, not only for tourists but also for business people.
Have you seen the Vienna airport departure side though? It's like 5 flights a day to Tirana, 7 flights a day to Podgorica. It's a whole another ballgame there.
But I wouldn't compare Vienna and Budapest in that regard. either. I mean, it's a different story when it comes to, let's say, history and Vienna's position in the Western Balkans.
So before we attack the 2 elephants in the room, which is Russia and energy, I'd like to open up the floor to questions from the audience on what we've just discussed, if you have anything.
Hello, my name is Christina Griesler, Androssi University Budapest. So thanks very much for the discussion. Congratulations to the report. Just a very practical question: where can I get the report? Can I download it somewhere? Or?
Yes, this is actually the PDF from our website. So
because I was looking for it, I couldn't find. So I will keep looking. Thanks very much.
We'll give it to you later.
Another question, you were touching on it. It's the relationship between Orban and Dodik, and for me, that's not really transparent. What's going on? So there was the issue that it seemed that Republika Srpska was kind of bankrupt. So the Hungarian government gave a lot of money, a very good loan with very low interest rate, to the Republika Srpska. But then there was additional loans where they were supposed to buy agricultural machinery. So I think there are a lot of money flowing into Bosnia with kind of different conditions as well. And for me, it's not quite clear what's happening there. So why is Orban interested really to support Dodik that much? And then the issue, I think Ivana was mentioning it at the beginning, the stability issue. I mean, is Orban creating stability in the region, or by supporting Dodik, is he not creating instability? But then telling the European Union, but I make sure that it's all going to be fine. So we have this concept of the stabiliocracy now being transferred to Hungary, maybe. So because it's not quite clear what role Orban plays as well in relation to the Jančar Budapest the paper, in relation of the division of Bosnia that was floating around a while ago. So maybe you can have some insights on what's going on in this Bosnian-Hungarian relations, because I think it's maybe deliberately kept very grayish in relation with the money flows and money input. Thanks.
Should we allow more or just respond directly?
This was actually the next talking point that we had, so right on.
Okay. Well, I can just briefly answer to that. I mean, there is, so there are loans, but there are also grants through private foundations that are given to, entities in Republika Srpska that they can draw from. So there is definitely, a robust approach there. I think it's about, expanding the influence beyond Vojvodina, and I think there is a lot of encouragement for this relationship to take place from other EU players. As strange as it may seem. For example, the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Christian Schmidt, he talks to Dodik only via Orban, which is a bit strange if you think about his institutional role in the country, So I think going into Bosnia is another, game of cards, because there are many EU member states that have their own interests and policies there that are not those of the EU, and that may undermine as well the stability of the country, Croatia being one of them, and so on. So I think, it's a complicated picture. Yeah, but this is about it in a nutshell.
If I may add on the Dodik-Orban relation, and also that is one more paradox because Orban is maintaining close relations with Dodik, but Dodik is seen as an instability factor in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is also contradictory, because if Hungarian government is trying to maintain stability in the region, why is it supporting Dodik so much? But I think it also has to do with something that Srdjan mentioned, Orban wanting to position himself as kind of a link between the Western Balkan leaders and the EU. And that goes into hand for Orban because he can use this as a leverage in case, let's say, to diminish some pressures coming from Brussels. So in case there is some instability in the region, if Orban is able to settle it down, it would be good for him. So I think that him being presented as a key regional player and as an intermediator, this is what keeps him related to Dodik and Bosnia.
Yes, but I think the question is how much stability it really brings. I think is really very important one. I can just recall one statement of the Hungarian Prime Minister. I think 2-3 years ago, maybe when he visited Republika Srpska and talking about Bosnia Herzegovina, he told that we see in this case as well that if you allow too many Muslims in the country, then it can create troubles, and it did not resonate that well in other parts of Bosnia Herzegovina for understandable reasons, and I felt there a bit that is playing with fire, and I don't think that Orban does not understand the weight and importance of such statements. So it's investing in Milorad Dodik as the main stabilizer of the region. I think if this is the strategy, then it's questionable. Yeah, it might be that Orban can domesticate Dodik to a certain extent, but I don't know that well Dodik's politics to judge that. I think one other important example of this questionable stabilizing role is when Orban was highly supportive to Nikola Gruevski and VMRO, even during why they were campaigning against the settlement of the name dispute, and which I think, but it's not for me to judge, that I think it created great opportunities for Northern Macedonia, and also it was a very important step, and I think Orban seemed to play a double game there as well, not obviously standing behind the Euro-Atlantic mainstream, which is like, let's settle this dispute, but rather playing with this ambivalence.
On Dodik, can I just have a very brief follow-up question? Like, to what extent do you think Hungary and Orban, or maybe the EU with the channel that Orban provides, is investing in Dodik to prevent further destabilization rather than to stabilize Bosnia via Dodik?
I think they're counting on the fact that Dodik is pretending that he wants to secede, that he is pretending that he wants to undermine the constitutional setup of the country for political gain, because they probably recall that back at the time he was the main joker of the Euro-Atlantic community of Bosnia and Herzegovina when he appeared on the political scene. So I think they think he's insincere. The main point about him is that he is this kind of corrupt strongman that wants to stay in power as long as possible. So I think this is the ironical hope there, in terms of, and but the fact that Orban is given this to manage this relationship is shown also by the fact that, for example, office of the High Representative in Banja Luka ever since 2016 is being led by Hungarian diplomats. There was no other head of that office since then. So it's kind of considered by the international community in some ways as something that was given to Orban, counting on him that he can manage this.
Now,
Thanks. Thanks a lot. First of all, my name is István Szent Iván. I would like to congratulate Csárdás and Ivana, for everyone, of course. It was an excellent panel and excellent presentation. I have a short remark and a question. My short remark is Mr. Orbán is a disruptive politician, not a stabilizer. He is not interested in stability of Western Balkan. It's completely false to think that he is interested in that. He's interested in conflicts because he supposes that he can get some benefit from those conflicts, and therefore he's instigating the conflicts and not easing the conflicts as well. My short question, you indicated, but not going into details of the Russian role in the bilateral relationship between Hungary and Serbia, and even between Hungary and Republika Srpska. I'm sure that Russia plays a crucial role in that relationship. Not the basic, not the substantial, but it's an additional role in that relationship. How can you see that? Thanks.
No other questions. Can we collect a few more and then?
Yeah, Luke Zettel and Russia University as well. 2025, 2030, we don't know when the next accession is gonna be, but if some or all might join the EU club, will they all leave Orban behind as their friend, or will there still be some kind of role for Orban left?
Interesting.
Anyone else? Okay. Do you want to go with the?
Okay, I just very briefly on the Russian importance of Russian connections. I think especially in the current geopolitical climate, and I think it's true since the annexation of Crimea, being pro-Russian is clearly not a winning diplomatic position, or at least not openly. So from that respect, I think this shared sympathy could definitely play an important role, even bringing these countries more together and share, or these players, and share a bit of siege mentality. And I think we did not really talk about the obsession of conspiracy theories, but I think this clearly connects these three gentlemen together. And in many sense, I interestingly enough, when I was reading about conspiracy theories 10, 12 years ago, I mean, many conspiracy theories that were circulated and very widespread in the Western Balkans, and in particular, Serbia was was always mentioned as one of the champion of conspiracy theories, have floated into Hungary as well. So, and I would not say, and of course, many of them also originate in Russia, and I think this this victim identity, this shared, the feeling of that we are ill understood, the mainstream is against us. I think this psychological and ideological component is very important. Of course, economic component is important as well, especially when it comes to energy policy. But I think if we cannot just downplay these relationships as a fan club of Vladimir Putin, and I would come up with the example of Azerbaijan. I mean, Orban obviously chose Azerbaijan against Armenia and he just how to say, doubles down on his support to Baku, even if if we put the two countries in to the scale of their proximity to Russia, Armenia is clearly way more close to Russia than Azerbaijan. So I don't think that Russia plays the most dominant role probably in shaping these relationships, but of course the shared economic interests of Russia and these countries, I think put them in similar economic position, and I think economic policy is clearly important here, or energy policy is important here.
Yeah, I also wanted to highlight the economic aspects and energy policy in particular, in which I can see some kind of Russian influence. in shaping bilateral relations between Hungary and Serbia. Not that much on Hungary and Republika Srpska, because, and answering Kristina's earlier question, I see the good relations between Orban and Dodik as some kind of spin-off as a result of the good relations between Vučić and Orban. So naturally at that time, or after the reconciliation, Hungary wanted to have good relations with the closest allies and partners of Serbia. So naturally the number one option would be the respective leader or leaders of Republika Srpska at that time.
Or maybe also mediating between Vučić and Dodik, you know, because they're not so close all the time, you know. But maybe to answer on Russia to Istvan, I mean, it's strange because if you look, and I would leave, you know, to Peter and Ferenc to talk about, you know, why is Orban having the policy towards Russia that he does. But, you know, whereas when you look at Hungary, you know, it has a lot to do probably with the economy, gas. You know, 60% of the households here, if I'm not mistaken, are heated on gas. Vučić wants to appear when he talks to the West that it's about this, but it's not. You know, it's not the same situation economically in Serbia. Serbia doesn't depend when it comes to at least heating households on gas so much as Hungary, much less. You know, the industry, okay, that it's important there, but electricity plays still an important major role working. So maybe nuclear is more interesting if we would tackle that question later, you know, Paks 2 and what's going on there. But on the energy front, you know, in Serbia, when it comes to Russia, it's more about the sheer politics. If you look at some public opinion polls conducted in the later years, I recall one in 2019 did by BIEPAG. It basically showed that when you look at Serbian political parties, the supporters of the ruling coalition, so Vučić, Socialist Party of Serbia, are mostly pro-Russian. If you look at everyone else, it's much less. So there is a lot that why there is such a posture when it comes to sanctions, and everything has to do with two things, with that and with Kosovo, you know. So there is a different dynamic there when it comes to Hungary. And talking about the Russian influence, well, the main promoter of Russian propaganda in Serbia and the Balkans is actually media under the control of the regime in Belgrade, not Russia itself. You know, nobody watches Russia Today or Sputnik. So yeah, I guess there's some similarities there. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. The question I didn't forget. You know, there is no way it will happen in 2025 if you consider full membership is just like, I know, Finland, they do it in 3 years, so, you know, we are kind of, you know, far away from that, but 2030 and what happens when they come in, it will have to do a lot with the socialization, political socialization of the leaderships of these countries, you know, not only current ones, but overall ones, you know. So all the calls for the Western Balkans countries to be included as candidates in some, you know, decision-making fora as observers within the EU also makes sense in that way, you know, so that they can have more interlocutors than just those that are running after them, like the Prime Minister here. So it's hard. Will they leave him behind? It all depends, you know.
I want to also ask you in the question form, rather than say it, what the contrast is between Hungary's Russia politics and the Russia politics of the Western Balkan countries in light of Hungary being an EU and NATO member, and these countries not being EU and NATO members. Orban famously says that every time he goes to meet Putin, including his last visit in Beijing, he had discussed the meeting beforehand with NATO and EU leaders. I wasn't there, so I don't know if that's true, but he could have. The channel was there, and so the role is different. Whereas when Vučić goes to Moscow, it's also a different thing.
I think he told to Michel at his last visit to Belgium that he's going to meet with Putin. Michel told him it's not a good idea. Still, he did. So I think it's it's a consultancy. Let's say it this way. So it's like not.
But if you compare the two approaches, they're very different, and I think EU and NATO membership allow Orban to do much more in that sense than Vučić, Whereas Orban was praising that he had these bilateral meetings with Putin, Vučić was talking about brief encounters and then videos of him roaming around the palace in Beijing alone were viral on Serbian social networks, So I think, how Orban appears and how he wants to appear is very different because Vučić has to take into account much more if you look at carrots and stakes, the EU and NATO stake in this regard.
But beyond just these meetings, the Russia posture of Hungary is obviously way more complex because of its membership. So
yeah, of course. Yeah. And also, I would think, and this would be my question to everyone, really, which flabbergasts me all the time, thinking about 1956 and all the historical baggage. How does one political leader in this country manage to overturn the narrative in such a way? But I don't understand that. In Serbia is completely different. And we could talk hours about that, but it's really not the same. We didn't have this sort of relationship, to use a euphemism, with the Soviet Union and Russia historically.
Do you think that the Kosovo issue keeps Serbia hostage to Russia, kind of the similar way that energy does in the region?
Yeah, a lot, or at least there is the entire Serbian foreign policy is basically held hostage by the Kosovo question. So if one question is should it, the other question is if it does, and if this is your question, then yes, it does. I think there is this perception, but if you look at the discourse coming from Moscow to a rational politician on the other side, it doesn't give a lot of certainty that there will be always this backing with no strings attached. I think if I were a politician in Belgrade, I would kind of have more hope, if this is the foreign policy goal, that some of the 5 non-recognizers in the EU will maintain their position, because you don't see any relationship from Belgrade or any there is a relationship, but any kind of similar relationship in the public narratives coming towards Romania or any other country for that regard. So I think, on the one hand, yes, Kosovo with Russia, but on the other hand, I think you come back to that political motive which comes, because you would lose your voters, hardcore support to other right-wing parties, and this is what Vučić really doesn't want to happen. I mean, we have a test about that in 17th of December, and I didn't want to comment on your remark that maybe nothing will change. Well, let's see.
The presidency is not for election, so.
The presidency is nothing without the government. So, and he said it himself the other day. Whereas, let's see whether he does it, but that he will resign if he doesn't have the majority of his party and his coalition. So he will not resign, but because there's immunity attached and all of these things. But I think it is a message to boost the morale and engagement in the campaign of his local party leaders.
Can we just bring in energy into this Russian relationship matrix, because obviously that's one of the main fuels of it all. how do you see the Russian energy issue changing? I mean, we've seen Turkish Stream open up, and then we've seen Bulgaria playing like a sort of a power game with that. How exposed do you see the region to Russia vis-a-vis energy, and how genuine do you see the ways out? A lot of criticism toward Hungary has been that it could have by now cut all reliance on Russian energy, but it hasn't. Some other countries are probably not able to do that even if they wanted to. So what's that Russian energy reliance looking like region-wide, and what sort of differences exist?
Here in the region, the presence of Russian energy is still higher, I mean, than many Western European countries, and I do think that both Orban and Vučić probably shares this view that they want to remain or become, let's say so, the energy hub of the region and the distributor of Russian energy coming to the region, and for that I think Turkish Stream might be an important instrument in towards this strategy, and I'm not an energy expert myself, but my friends working in the energy industry tells us that the figures we read about the current energy exposure of the European Union to Russia are a bit misleading, because many gas that's circulating in Europe are Russian gas molecules mixed with some other gas molecules and then relabeled as not Russian gas. And even my Ukrainian friend of mine talking in the energy sector told about it. So I do think that that European Union have not cut its Russian energy dependency. There are many optimistic statements about that. I think it's not a fact yet. There is a lot of wishful thinking around that, and I think right now we arrive to a point, especially with many conflicts on the Ukrainian, with a more frozen front, to say so, not in the literal sense, but in the sense that it's not this dynamic war anymore, when many start to question if Ukraine can win the war. And I do think that it can just amplify strategic thinking in Europe that probably Russian energy is indispensable for the European Union, and to a certain extent I think it still is. And in that respect I think maybe Orban and Vučić seem to bet on the wrong horse in many sense, but when it comes to the influence of Russian energy in European Union, maybe they are a bit more realistic than many in the West about EU will be totally independent of Russian gas.
It's interesting what you're saying, because before the discourse seemed to be that the only question is how fast countries will completely sever their ties with Russian gas, and the front runners like Bulgaria were hailed as, okay, now you've done it, now it's for the other countries in the region to tick it off as well. But if that's not the case, then Orban and Vučić may actually be betting on the right horse, and then that might actually serve their interests
in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see it now, right? Because even I was talking about the Yana pipeline oil, and the whole business of the Serbian druzhba, how they call it, and I cannot, knowing how things work in the region, I cannot escape from thinking there is a lot of corruption involved and kind of entrenched clientelistic interests that drive certain decisions also on the energy front. Serbia could theoretically buy other oil through Yana. It doesn't have to be Russian oil. Is much cheaper, but looking in the long term. But what happens now? They buy Russian oil because they can sell it back to the Bosnia at very cheaply and earn a lot. Buy it cheaply, sell it much more expensive, earn on the difference, because the only way the refineries there can get it is through, one of the ways through Serbia. Gas is the other thing, Balkan Stream or Turkish Stream, what happened with Bulgarian decision to increase the transit fee now to plus 10 euros per megawatt hour is a significant blow to both Belgrade and Budapest, because what Bulgarians are saying, it will be for Gazprom to pay because the prices are already negotiated downstream. But obviously here and in Belgrade fear that they might cut the supply altogether. Whether this will happen or not. So thinking about the long term, for me in this particular time is a bit more difficult. What happens in the EU, I was the other night watching last year's Hungarian movie Blockade, from 2022, and the blockade from 1990, and we were just discussing with Ivana, this was an issue then, and now 30 years, this oil and gas supply. Why didn't we, in Serbia is the same, why didn't we diversify before? When we were in Serbia about to sell our entire petrol industry to Russians, it was the previous government that did it. It wasn't Vucic, so there is a lot of let's say uninventive thinking in that field. I would think in nuclear is an entire.
Let me ask you a question about that, because gas is sort of a common, a shared sort of exposure to Russia, but nuclear is one area where true cooperation between Hungary and Serbia can exist, and they've been planning this for some time, of like building excess nuclear capacity in Hungary and using Serbia's hydro capacity as pump hydro, and then thereby connecting the two countries' electric operations, which is true, like strategic thinking in that vein. But
also, if you
first, the Russians have to build a big new nuclear plant. So, how do you see this strategic thinking in this way?
Well, also there could be some strategic thinking, but what we see now, it's a bit puzzling, because the Serbian president came out on several occasions saying that Serbia would be willing to take part as an investor in the PAX 2 extension project. So, and even up to the amount of 10%. So you think, okay, why would actually Serbia do? I mean, you see some interest there. Hungary is, as we said, heating 60% on gas. So at night time, you have overproduction of electricity in Hungary. You could sell it to Serbia that needs more electrical energy often, because it's also heating a lot on energy, and also it's used a lot for industrial production. But then why do you need to actually invest in PAX? You could simply buy electrical energy from Hungary. So there, we were exploring in the paper several hypotheses that were indicated to us by our interlocutors, which is, could avoiding the sanctions for equipment needed to build the extension of PAX 2 be one of the reasons why there would be an investor, from Serbia, because, nowadays there is a lot of talk about re-export in Serbia in this regard, because Serbia hasn't introduced sanctions to the Russian Federation. But talking about hydro and cooperation in that sense, I mean, there is already that kind of happening, because the question is, and it's all related to the privatization and sale of Serbian electrical public utility companies. So there was some mention of Hungarian investment and privatization in the small hydro, whether that would include larger electrical producing hydro capacities, which aren't mentioned for the moment in this context, is to be seen. But another ballgame entirely whether it will be beneficial for Serbia, because how is this related to PAX 2 economically? I still don't see.
Fans, you seem to have a
Yeah, thank you. Well, Srojan talked a lot about, let's say, the nuclear energy, and Serbia's, let's say, willingness to join the project in some capacity. I call it a bluff, basically. And first and foremost, because of the fact that I don't see PAX 2 or any other nuclear project being materialized in Hungary anytime soon. And when it comes to, and we also talked about a lot about strategic thinking and thinking about the future and long-term plans and whatnot. And what I was thinking about is, should the war in Ukraine end, who is going to be the first one to somehow build ties with Russia again concerning fossil fuels? I guess some European countries will join that train on cooperating with Russia in this regard as well, again. But they will definitely try to avoid Ukraine, or they will definitely try to avoid pipelines that going through Ukraine, and that is very similar to me what happened, I don't know, like 15 years ago, around 2007, 8, when there were like feuds between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia at one point or two times even cut off Ukraine and thus Hungary and Bosnia and Serbia from the pipelines. And I remember we had like very cold winters at that time. So I guess in the near future, or in the future after the war ends in Ukraine, the narrative would be to somehow avoid pipelines that go through Ukraine, and thus that might leave, let's say, a heightened importance to the already existing Turkish stream, which obviously, pumps Russian gas and oil, but it avoids Ukraine. So it might be, at the end of the day, as we mentioned, Orban and Vučić in this sense might be, riding the right horse.
Just wanted to ask the audience again if Russia and energy intersections prompt anyone for questions. No. Yes.
From a German perspective, it's always quite puzzling that there is no seen willingness to exit that gas or oil dependency. So why is that? So that Germany is very proud that at least we think or say that we cut off all our Russian gas supplies, some more willingly, some less.
The Ukrainians did it for you.
Yeah, who knows? But here, for me at least, it seems like that there is no wish to diversify this gas necessity. So there is no willingness to go for more electrical heating or anything like this. The dependency is seen of like a natural constancy, maybe. So I don't know why. I wish to get more perspective on that. Maybe you can help me with that.
The entire system is very much outdated. I mean, we didn't really pay attention to diversifying our resources in the last, 20 to 30 years. And I guess energy relations, or let's say this energy dependency, is a good means to Orban to keep its good relations to Russia.
But if I may add, I also think that Russian energy sources are cheaper, and that is, I think, the main reason, because buying cheap oil and gas from Russia means cheap electricity for the voters, meaning keeping the voters. So I think that is maybe the rationale behind both Serbia and Hungary.
Yeah, theoretically, I think it would be a good reason, but in fact, if we look back in the last, I think, 2 years when Hungary bought larger chunks of Russian gas, and it were the periods where it was extremely expensive, and sometimes, and again, it's not me who's saying that, but real energy experts, they say that there would have been cheaper energy available from Western sources. So I think you're right that there seems to be an unwillingness, and connecting to France as well, to cut this kind of energy dependency. And if we just look back on Orban's statements back to 2018, I think he made a statement that by 2022 he will cut Russia dependence from Russian energy considerably, and I think we have passed this deadline, and I do not see that materializing that quickly as he promised back then.
Yeah, I was also going to add to that like there seems to be this narrative that buying cheap energy and selling that to the Hungarian voter as like fighting for the average consumers, and it seems to be the dominant narrative from the Orban government. But at the same time, when we look at the economic facts, it has one of the highest inflations in the Eurozone, by far worse than Germany, and almost as bad I saw it as Estonia, which was even more dependent on Russian gas and turned and tried to lower its gas dependency on Russia. So I don't think that seems more to be a narrative than an actual major reason that the lower prices of the Russian gas. And what I've read is that also, for example, in 2014 or something like that, there was a case of a corruption case where a friend of Orban, I don't know, bought from a fake Russian Swiss company gas for higher price or something like that. So I always feel like these kind of backroom deals that allow the Orban government to funnel more, or Orban and his friends to funnel more money into his friends' pockets, seems to be more of a bigger reason than actual rational economic reasons.
Dark backroom energy deals have been a fact of life in Eastern Europe for a long, long time. Yeah.
So looking at the gas dependency is double less in Serbia, so probably double more back deals, with this thinking.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at Juju. How much longer do we have? Wrap it up. Okay, so last question that I really wanted to get to is, since we have the influence of Hungary in the Balkans, is what are the limits of that influence? And one example that I have in mind, especially regarding Serbia, is what's important for Serbia. Well, the most important goal for Serbia is resolving Kosovo, although it's obviously a next to impossible task to do it to everybody's liking. But also, resolving the Bosnian issue, Bosnian statehood, instability, or resolving the Western Balkans EU membership, regardless of Varhey's efforts or Hungary's stewardship of that in the EU. It's not really looking like it's happening, if at all, in 2030. Major obstacles of the EU taking on Ukraine and other countries at the same time. In this context, how do you see Hungary's effectiveness in promoting the Serb stewardship?
Right, I think it depends whom you ask in Serbia. What's the major goal? Some would say Kosovo. I wouldn't say that absolutely, because I think all of the issues that you mentioned could be solved through EU membership. So to the extent to which any country supports Serbia's EU membership, be it Hungary, Italy or Austria, whichever country, it's welcome in that sense. I think now when you ask me, no politician in Serbia would turn against Orban if he is still in power here, because he would be the one who supports it. it will depend on him whether he will be as good of a friend to anybody else in Belgrade as he was to Vučić. So I think there are no limits, because any EU member state, until there is an institutional reform and until there is a qualified majority in that sense, is very important. And you know, when you look at some other neighbors of Serbia, like Croatia, that, you know, for the moment one must say its parliament has voted for a resolution that you know, pledged not to invoke bilateral issues on Serbia's EU accession path. But I think nobody really believes that this will be the case, because the temptation is just so huge. So politically, it's you know, to be expected. So in that sense, Hungary would still have a role to play. I don't know, for other Western Balkan countries, I think the question that came from the gentleman before, you know, will they leave? You know, because now we talk as if Orban will be in power forever. He won't. That, you know, one day will come and there will be a change of government here too. So, but if we have this government in Hungary, I think some other, you know, Western Balkan leaders, if they're the ones that will carry their countries into the EU, will flip more according to the political alliances. You know, so Rama is in SD, you know, that would be his natural political family and so on. So I think it will have an impact in terms of socialization when you talk about that. I don't know if this really answers your question. It wasn't an easy question, but
no, it does actually. I tend not to necessarily agree that the EU accession overrides everything else, but I mean, EU accession has to happen, and before it happens,
Yeah.
the EU has said fairly clearly that
Yeah.
Kosovo needs to be resolved.
right.
And same with Bosnia. So rather than being a remedy, it's a goal now.
Yeah, it overrides the questions that you mentioned. It wouldn't override, you know, other internal political questions like, you know, social differences in the country, you know, all of that. But recently we talked a lot about Dodik. Dodik likes to talk about this idea of Serbian world, you know, like copycat of Ruski Mir, and then it's just something that it's a political propaganda tool. It's not a reality. And then it was really funny that Serbian party leader in Montenegro, who is now the chair of the parliament, replied to Dodik and said, well, you know, this may be Dodik's dream, but all Serbs will be in one state in the EU. You know, so so coming from Andrija Mandić, you know, this was telling that Dodik is kind of several years behind and entrapped into his, you know, political illusions, I would say. You know, so all the questions that you named, Kosovo, Bosnia, will be resolved by EU accession.
Let's hope so. Is that a good last word?
Read the paper.
Yes.
Read the paper.
Oh, read the paper.
Yes, and we can help.
paper is available online. You will find it at the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. So if you put it there, you will find it. It's really worth reading. So thank you very much. I'm not supposed to complete or summarize. It was really very deep and interesting, and I think you had a lot of nuances of this paradoxic or often controversial or ambivalent relationship between Fidesz's government and, well, mainly Serbia, but also the other countries which were mentioned in the Western Balkans. It's probably it would be in the long run better if there was a more organic relationship between the two countries' political elite and the people as well. So then there is something to do with this. So it's not dependent so much on two persons. How did you call it? Chemistry, right? That's really a strange comment, but maybe just one additional additional comment on the relationship, of course, that the EU accession is going to happen. The talks will move on. There is a strong interest in Europe because of the Ukraine war and because of a lot of other influences in the Balkans other than Hungarians, Chinese and Russians, and as the Serbian society might not be so positive on EU membership as it before. So obviously these are very important elements. And well, new ideas of EU accessions are under consideration. So although because of Ukraine, no EU accession will be as it was before. There are ideas of kind of more gradual accession processes, partial opening certain parts of the EU membership, which probably provide some solutions for this highly complicated realities. Of course, Hungary will have an important role because of Oliver Varhelyi is still the commissioner, and of course, Hungary will also be will hold a presidency after the EU elections next year, which will probably be the time also to continuing these talks. So actually, this is an ongoing issue. It's a report. This opens up a lot of interesting questions, answers some, and opens even more. So thank you very much for coming, staying for long, and of course our wonderful speakers. And very sad that Edith Inotai could not join us. She had to report from Feldshut Stadium tonight to German television, where the two Israeli teams are playing. That she had to go there, though she probably would have enjoyed this much better. But anyway, thank you very much, Ivana and Ferenc, Péter, Jan, and Márton, and for all of you to coming. And we will continue this kind of discussions other times. So thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.